Okay, I'm gonna start.
1 minute.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Data Analytic Group Global Power Platform Bootcamp 2026 Vizag edition. Our first speaker is Shubhangi Goyal. She is a senior analyst and MVP and public speaker. So, Shubhangi, I'm handing over the stage to you on customer first analytics. I just want to share, need to know that how you are going to visualize the Power BI dashboards by using this customer first analytics way. So, looking forward for your session. Yeah, stage is yours, Shubhangi.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Shubhangi. My session is going to be focused on customer first analytics. Thanks to Rajendra for hosting this event and Global Power Platform team. So before I start, I would like to give a quick introduction about myself. I currently work at Admiral. I work as a senior analyst. I've been in the space for around 10 years now. I've spoken on several platforms, some of which you can see on the screen. I also mentor people on who want to break and build a career in technology. And I also manage a nonprofit organization, Women in Data, for the London region, primarily for women who want to build their careers in technology, data, AI. Um, and that's just me in a nutshell. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP. So yeah, this is everything about me. Before we move on, the agenda for today is I'm going to be covering five main things in my session. Firstly, like what a customer first mindset is. Then how do you translate the business questions into like real world issues and like real world problems. Then how do you design your dashboards, data visualization, and then feedback adoption. So I'm going to be covering all these five main things in my session. So let's start from the beginning. And look at this statement, deliver on what business needs. So if you look at this line, you would think about the last time, basically like whenever you spoke to a customer, whenever you started building a dashboard or a metric, like what time was it, and how did you incorporate like any kind of feedback that you get from your customer. Like the most questions I've heard from meetings is like people asking, what does our data show, and instead of like what does a customer need. And customers first analytics basically focuses on what the user wants first. And basically they become your true north star and focus on like the questions, the requirements, and really understanding what your stakeholders, they can be your stakeholders, they can be your users, they can be anybody who are really like gonna use it, and essentially thinking like how the business really works and what value does that data basically provide to the business. So there are four main things that come a part of customer first analytics. First is being outcome driven. Second is context aware. Third is actionable. And fourth is continuous feedback. So when we talk about outcome driven, this means we analyze every single step by asking what is the outcome we are trying to achieve, not by what metric we can move or what dashboard we can build and what problems we're actually basically going to solve. The next one is being context aware. When we say context aware, it means what is the story that your data is really telling. So every single chart or visual that you add in your dashboard is essentially like telling a story. What business question does that visual really answer? The third one is actionable. Most of the time, I've seen like a lot of people building dashboards, but there isn't any actionable insight coming out of that dashboard or like the design that they built. So how do you make that actionable? And then implementing feedback. Every time you build a dashboard, there are several feedbacks. For example, can you add a new slicer? Can you add a new filter? Can you create a new visual or chart for this? So how do you like implement feedback and show that you're actually like really moving the dial further instead of just building something and leaving it there, because a lot of times dashboards are being created but they're not essentially being maintained or like improvised over the course of time, which essentially can cause issue in the long run. So let's start by talking about the four main reasons why you need customer first analytics. So the four main reasons, obviously the first is trust. A lot of times dashboard don't show reliable data, or the teams have created have not understood the data enough, and this leads to like lack of trust on data retention and value that it brings. Aligning different data teams together, because if your different sources show different numbers, it becomes quite challenging in most cases to like believe that the numbers are actually right. And then thinking from a customer success lens and not just vanity metrics, like building something just for the sake of building and building something which actually somebody can use, they're really two different things. So how do you draw all these pieces of puzzles together? And it all starts by asking the question, what problem is the customer trying to solve when we are building this dashboard? Are they trying to understand the sales have increased? Are they trying to understand why the revenue has dropped? What is the main goal of building a dashboard? So generally, you will find in an organization there will be different hierarchies of people who are going to use dashboard. But let's take an example. There are three main hierarchies here. There's an executive, there's an analyst, there's an operations manager. So if you look at these three people, they operate at different levels. So they need different levels of detail. So for example, you have an executive, and they basically would only want to care about very high level, top level insights. They probably don't care about every single detail in your data because they have a couple of minutes. They want to get like and understand what the data really is telling them. But let's say if you're an analyst and you have built a dashboard and you are trying to look at the data, analysts are people who are really detail oriented and they look at every single aspect. For them, having every single thing created and understood is important. So the level of detail for that dashboard is different. Then third is operations manager. So let's say you are an ops manager, you're somewhere, let's say, below an executive, but like probably like more detailed than an executive, but maybe less detailed than an analyst. So what really happens is you're still looking at KPIs, you're still looking at metrics, but maybe not to the lead detail as an analyst. So the difference here is there are three different people, but they're looking at the same thing from a different lens. And they're looking at different lens because they care about different metrics. Maybe they care about different level of detail, and maybe not every single view that you have created will actually cater to the need of each of these audience size. So how does it interpret into like when you look at dashboard? Let's imagine that this circle is your dashboard. And when you create a dashboard for a shared focus or a similar level, it gives a signal, which means it gives them the right insight. And let's say, for example, it's created for a set of executives. But then let's say you have created a similar dashboard, which is created for different level of audiences, which is sales or operations team. It basically signals noise. It's not really giving them the right insight because these two different teams probably do not care about the same metrics or the same key performance indicators. So it's important to understand first like who the user is, what they're trying to achieve, and what are the questions they're going to ask you. Are they basically trying to improve the conversion rate? Are they trying to remove the barriers of why customers are not paying, let's say, for subscription? Understanding the need of the customer comes first when building this. So let's talk about five main things further on this. So first is purpose over pixels. So when you design a visual, highlight the so what to make your visuals answer the business question. So like a lot of times there is a lot more time spent, let's say, on building a visualization. But I think it's also important to understand why you have built a visualization. So understand the so what behind the visual that you're trying to create. The second is one message, which means prioritize clarity and group insights carefully. So I'll discuss some visualization principles towards the end, but every single chart that you create has to be very clear and it is needed to send a single message. And most of the time when people create visuals, they tend to like make dashboards in which, for example, there are multiple line charts or multiple bar charts, but they're all scattered and they're probably when telling different metrics. So one key message, prioritize carefully and group those different things together in a meaningful manner. Third is user workflow. Like everybody likes dynamic dashboards. So use filters, time frames, things people will actually care about. Then the fourth one is narrative over noise. So wherever you see and that there is some story you want to tell with your chart, add some sort of narrative. For example, are you trying to show trend lines, for example, for the last 12 months, 6 months, last 2 years, whatever is your trend, like what is the narrative you're trying to create there. If you have any issues in your chart or any specific thing you want to flag, add those flags here or add those comments. And then lastly, add clear definitions and disclaimers wherever needed, simply because dashboards are designed to serve decision making or support decision making. So if at any point your data isn't right and you feel that it is not clear to the stakeholders or customers or the users, whoever they are, please make sure to add any kind of clear definitions and disclaimer wherever needed. And these are very like common things that happens every single time. I've seen in several different occasions that people tend to miss these small things and they spend quite a lot of time, maybe weeks, months, building a really good piece of like work, but they actually never lands the message that it is supposed to land. So let's start with mapping a data inventory. So when you get a requirement, you generally get a set of data. A lot of times what happens, people don't tend to do this. Like they don't know what the data source is exactly, who the owner of the data source is, what is the quality of the data and what are the gaps. So they don't know what data exists versus what's assumed. And that creates a knowledge gap simply because you don't know like how the source, from where the source has come, what kind of like team is managing that source, how essentially you can use this. So when you start building this, make sure that you make a catalog of data, internal, external, whatever data source you have. Identify the owners, what is the refresh frequency of your data, because these are very simple issues. And do like know like what kind of reports were created before, what the Excel spreadsheets, what some other like tools used to build it. So understand the mapping and the data inventory. I generally use use a list of this sort depending on the level of detail I want to go, and I know what exists where and why. So you should know what's your data asset name, like for example, which kind of data set you're gonna use, what's the domain. So let's say you're working in a particular type of industry, maybe it's finance, maybe it's medical, and let's say you are working in a part of that industry. So what's the domain of your like dashboard? What's the context basically? Then why you are building it, then what kind of source system it has. For example, is it like a CRM? Is it like a ERP, like a web? What is the basically source system it contains? And there are several other things in the list, as you can see. You can also, I generally also write things like update frequency. Is the data updating like daily at what time? Because a lot of times these things are not known to people, which are very simple and basic. And like I have not seen a lot of people actually working through data inventory list in detail, simply because there just like different things happening, there are tons of different work which is left behind, so they tend to like not create these things, and most of the times this is actually where one should also start. Mentioning about any data quality issues, for example, if there is any missing values, there is a like latency in data, any duplicates. And then also like for example, what is the downstream usage, like are you gonna build like a dashboard, are you gonna just build a report, what's the use of it. And then also sensitivity level, because I've also seen dashboards in which people have like placed PII and like very sensitive data. So understanding where the data is coming, how the data is mapped is like a really key step. It's a data discovery process. I remember this question was asked to me somewhere in a talk before I gave this one, and they asked me like how do we perform data inventory or data discovery, because it's a very key part of building a dashboard. And like they said to me that like a lot of times we know where the data sits, but we haven't done like enough or spent enough time to know. So make sure like when you start the project, when you start building dashboard, you also exactly have detailed understanding of your data, the databases, where the data sits and in what capacity. And even if you have enough time or limited time, try to make a small inventory list so that you have complete questions. Because once you build a dashboard, you are gonna go and like explain this thing to your stakeholders or customers, and they're gonna ask you a lot of questions. So you should have a very thorough understanding of what you have created, where does it sit in the whole pipeline. And let's talk about the second step, which is like translating the business question into KPI. So generally, there are six main steps under this one. Firstly, you will have a business question, which means you have to be really good at business domain. Break down that into a success criteria. Identify then what are the drivers or the levers of that particular question asked. Translate them into metrics, KPIs, and prioritize them, and then validate them. And this is basically the process you have to review and iterate every single time you build it. So let's see an example here. So let's take a use case. We have a business need where somebody is asking a question like we have to reduce the customer churn rate by 20% in the next 6 months. So this is the main goal. This is the main question that has been asked. What is the success criteria here? In this case, for example, there are three main things. We are trying to increase the customer retention rate. It is pretty simple because if you're reducing customer churn, you're trying to increase the retention rate. You're trying to identify and act on like the churns early, because it's a way of making sure that your customers are not leaving you. And then you're also trying to understand what's the user engagement behind it. This is what the success will look like if you see in the bigger picture. Now, if you want to attain this success, what are the key drivers for this churn? What could be potential reasons why this could be happening? Either somebody is not using the product effectively, they have a very bad experience using that product, there are billing issues. There could be like many, but let's say these are the three main reasons that are influencing this outcome. Now, this is a very vague understand, like very vague question given. You are translating that, and then you reach the fourth step, which is basically where your data comes into play. And that's why having good understanding of data is really important to translate this question into KPIs, your metrics, and prioritize them. So, for example, if I'm saying, hey, I want to understand the low usage of product. I would want to check the usage. I will check daily usage, monthly usage, how many people actually coming and using my product. If I want to understand user experience, let's say I will create a metric called NPS, like Net Promoter Score, to see like if somebody is actually liking or enjoying it. And if somebody's saying I have billing issues, and I would want to check like if I'm getting any billing complaints. So translate every question, see what the data you have, and then start creating the metrics if you're building it from scratch, if there is like no prior information available. Then once you have done this, like you can also create like a base mark or benchline, for example, target rate. So if you have historical data available, you can create like a target baseline. For example, less than 10% or greater than 10%, let's say, is my churn rate at the moment. This is the baseline. And I want to make sure that my baseline, like my churn is not increasing from that particular baseline. I'm trying to make sure my customers are actually still using my product and they're not going away. Now, once you build this, a lot of time different people use different definitions for the same metric, which is again a problem. So make sure you know which team owns which metric. For example, in this case, let's say marketing owns NPS and churn, the product team is owning usage and metrics, and the third is, let's say, finance team owns billing issues. So make sure the definition, the calculation, the formula that you have written is same across the board for different teams. And once you have done that, then report, we start building a dashboard after that. So then you create like a monthly churn dashboard with like trends, anomalies, and breakdown by cohort. This is essentially when you are getting any requirement from scratch, and they are like somebody has just given you 5 6 things, and you're like, I don't know where to start from. So you start from understanding the question and break it down from that. Think of this like an inverted funnel. Like you have a very top level requirement, but you start like breaking it down step by step. So let's talk about wireframes. So I'm gonna give some examples of wireframe. So wireframes are like a blueprint, like a visual blueprint, which basically helps to make sure that you are building the dashboard with like actual data and actual tools. Okay. So this one that you see on the screen is a sample that I've created or just on my iPad, and I've just imported it here. But obviously you can use different tools. For example, you can use PowerPoint or you can use Figma, which also works very well with Power BI. You can use Sketch or Paper Sketches, which are just basic. What it does for you is it helps the BI teams and your stakeholders basically reimagine and understand the functionality of how your dashboard will look like. And it's basically simple blueprint. Like you can imagine, for example, you have a layout in your mind for the kind of data you have. So you can think about the way you want to create it. So for example, in this one, I've just given like a header here for a KPI dashboard. Then on the left, I've given filters for financial year, department, region, and segment. Then I have basically on the top given four KPIs here for revenue, profit margin, and then NPS. And I try to keep 3 to 5 KPIs only in most of my like dashboards. And on the top right corner, I've given like a small icon for notification alerts. If I have to put any specific notifications, I will put it in the top right corner. Then as you go downwards, you will see like I've given 4 charts, but this is just a blueprint. So in these charts, I could also change the kind of chart I'm using. For example, here I've taken like a stacked column graph, and here I'm giving some insights. When I'm saying insights, I'm saying things, for example, which are predefined. For example, we are seeing a seasonal pattern every now and then in the data. This is something we know already. So we put this thing right there on the dashboard itself, because these questions recurringly occur because sometimes people tend to forget what happened 7 8 months ago. So put any kind of call out that you need to like people to remember every single time they view the dashboard, to like call like to make sure that they're looking it from that perspective. Then you can add, like, for example, I've given like a line chart or like a detailed data. Detailed data, I would suggest mostly do not place on the front or the first page, simply because they're generally used by, like, if people want to see what happened on day-to-day basis on a very detailed scale. So maybe add that through a drill down, or like add it on a particular internal hidden page, because putting detailed data on the top of the page does not really is not really the prime purpose of why a dashboard is built. So make sure you design a blueprint first before actually starting to build it. It saves really a lot of time, because without having a clear idea of how you want to create a dashboard, like it actually wastes a lot of weeks if you have no idea. So maybe start building with wireframes. These are some of the other examples of layouts that I have created. For example, if you look on the screen, this is like, for example, a complete design of like a dashboard page that I've created. In this one, I've built several layouts, like section 1, section 2. So I will try to place my visuals in these sections in a way that it works, for example, for me, and also like the way the users want to use it. Now, one would argue, why would we need layouts and why would do we need to think about wireframes? Simply because the people who are going to use this dashboard, let's say, they are not, they might not be very accustomed, to like using very complex way of like dashboards or maybe complex visuals. So you have to think about the way users can actually adapt to it. And sometimes, in many cases, building too many complex visuals which are not really telling the right story might not be the most effective way of building it. So think about a design of like how intuitive it can be, what kind of flow it should have, what metrics you will group together, and start by building the wireframe. These are some of the examples. For example, in this one, I have taken three main KPIs on the left side, and then I'll create like a bigger set of charts on this on the right side. And there are some couple examples. So you can build your own layouts. There are a lot of predefined layouts in Figma as well that you can use in conjunction with Power BI, and that should really help you to like find the right fit for the kind of dashboard you want to create. Now, let's talk a bit about design principles for dashboarding. So, designing intuitive dashboard is like really important because a lot of times I've seen people adding 7, 8 KPIs and then I think 6, 7 charts, and it becomes just too busy because there are too many, just too much information on one page happening. So, what I generally use is like I use like a Z shaped pattern, which you can see in the purple line on the screen, or like an F shaped pattern, which is again in this purple line. So Z-shaped pattern works because your eye travels in Z shape, like it travels from here to here. And designing this method is like very simple because what it does for you is like you are able to see like every single thing very in a very simple manner. Then again, F-shaped is basically, for example, you have kept a bunch of three different like KPIs on the left, and then you can add couple of charts here on the right. Now, F-shaped pattern is very popular in the UX designing world, and I'm sure you can find like certain examples as well online. But this essentially should be tailored according to the kind of dashboard you create. So let's say you are creating a sales dashboard, you can add all your sales KPI on the left, and then you can add all your charts, for example, line chart or column chart you create on the right. Similarly, these two like layouts work very effectively. And what it does for you is like it makes your dashboard look very like simple to use and easy to read as well. So one of the example of this one is, for example, on this Power BI dashboard, it's a very simple, like simple dashboard. In this one, you have basically kept five, let's say, key performance indicators on the top. So this is like a Z pattern, and then you have added like two charts here, and then essentially you're going around from here to like to the bottom left corner where you have sales by segment, and then, for example, sales by product name. It's a like how the Z pattern will actually move if you create like in a Power BI world basically. And what it does for you is it is really simple to use. It is really easy to read, and like most of the times the visuals that you create, like you can think about what visuals you will put. It makes things simple for you. So let's talk about this principle as well of design dashboarding, which is like inverted principle, which I also talked in the start. So essentially what happens is like, as I said, too much information on the top, on the front of the page can sometimes create confusion. So always make sure that the most important information you want to convey is on the top, which is basically your overview section, or you can also call it as an executive summary. And then any supporting information that you want to provide, which means like your second layer of charts, 4 to 5 charts at max, you can put in the breakdown, which is like what's happening. And then the third level is explore level, which is basically where you put the most detailed information, like any other details, which is why how I can learn more. So let's see this in a different way. If somebody enters your dashboard or clicks on your dashboard, right, and they open it, the first thing they want to understand is like, for example, I've built a sales dashboard. I want to understand how are we doing in sales. So that's what I will think when I will look at it. This is the overview section. That is the most important top level information I would need. The second thing I would see if my sales are dropping or growing is like what's happening. So that's like the breakdown section. So in this section, I would want to see supporting information of why my sales are like not working or why I'm not getting enough people to buy my products. And let's say if I have got some information there, but I would want more detail. Like for example, couple of days I can see there was no sales at all. So now I want to see what has happened. Did the user actually came at all on my like website or not? So I want to learn more. So this basically gives you a more detailed section, which is basically the other details. Here you can put like more detailed information, like your drill downs, or like your retail data. And this essentially should be the way you should design your dashboard, like in an inverted pyramid. Always prioritize the key thing first, and then the secondary stuff, and then the stuff which is basically gonna be too detailed. It it is like the best way to build the dashboard, and like it's actually like the way people actually also want to like interpret it. And it's easy to read again, because a lot of times, like if you put too detailed information on the top, it just kinds of like misses out the whole point. Like why, what message are you trying to say, what is the story of your dashboard? It just kind of misses the whole point. So I'm going to talk about just Charles design principles. They're very popular, but I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm only going to talk about four of them, because those four I use most often. So Gestalt is a theory. Basically, it was found back in like 20th century, and the word itself means shape and form. So in this, what happens basically is like, how do you interpret visualizations? Because visualizations is basically the way we will see and interpret the data. So there are five like main principles in this. For example, people see whole, not parts. Um, when I say people see whole, not parts, is like dashboards are not interpreted basically when you have one visual or one chart. They're interpreted as a whole, like as a whole, what the part, like what your dashboard looks like. So if your one visual is great, one is bad, it doesn't matter. You have to create as a whole a good dashboard essentially. Second is visual proximity creates meaning. So if you have a bunch of charts which are telling or which are based on similar metrics, they should be kept together. And I'm going to discuss proximity in my next slide. But proximity essentially means like any metrics which are similar, any charts which are similar, they should be kept together. You might be able to see proximity like in Zoom's website, for example. What they've done is like they have a bunch of icons which are similar to each other and they kept together. Third is consistency drives clarity, which means if you are working for an organization, you generally get a branding toolkit. Try to be consistent with that. A lot of colors do not like add value to your dashboard. Keep the branding, keep the colors consistent across the board, because they're simple, which is basically the fourth point. They lead to like easy comprehension. Using too many colors does not really help you in building the dashboard. And then lastly, use contrast effectively. So if you're using a lighter background, for example, white or light blue or light pink, use the contrast effectively to make sure it's readable for somebody. Sometimes people use like lighter colors, but then they use lighter color font as well. So if you're not using contrast effectively to your advantage, it's really, really hard for somebody to read it. So these are the five main aspects of the design principle of Gestalt. So let's talk about like the main four. So for example, similarity. Similarity, as the name suggests. So like for example, if you see this, there are like three yellow boxes, and there are the other three like red dots or red circles basically. So when you group things together, you have to make sure that similar aspects or similar charts are together. Then let's talk about proximity. Proximity again means like, for example, if I have four KPIs or four metrics, for example, or like four like metrics which are associated to each other, I will keep them next to each other because they together will make a story together. And if I have two other charts which are completely offbeat or different, I will keep them separate on the right maybe. Continuity, you might have seen continuity in Pinterest's website. Continuity is basically how your dashboard, how your visuals are flowing. Are they grouped together? So continuity basically means like from one point to another, your like charts are really together, sending a key message. And then the fourth one is closure. Closure is basically, sometimes you might have seen in charts, people tend to put like square boxes towards the outside, which are not really needed, because we tend to know that it's a square shape. We already tend to know that there is a visualization created. So creating additional layout or additional border does not really make sense. So let me show one example here in like how does it look, for example, on Power BI. So if you will see my screen at the moment, so this is the first example I'm showing on similarity, okay? And similarity principle basically states when objects that share a similar visual trait with one another, whether it could be shape, organization, size, or any other visual, the human lens basically perceives them as related, okay? So for example, if you see in this one, we have five different cards. And card visual, if you know, in Power BI, is a very powerful visualization. It's very utilized primarily for showing a single metric or a KPI. Let's take an example of this one. So in this one, what happens is like the four cards are displayed in the horizontal direction from left to right, obviously, each sharing the same size and font. However, if you see this one, the profit one, which is basically shaded blue, where the other cards are basically white. So the blue cards, it distinguishes itself from the other four cards because it shows a visual relationship, which means like all these four of them have a visual relationship amongst themselves. So the grouping reason could be the result of the card requiring additional significance because obviously it's about profit or importance over other cards. So if you are grouping something together, you would want to keep them in a similar way, but this one has slightly more privilege or significance. So we tend to keep them in a different color or design. The second one is proximity. So proximity, for example, you see these three buttons on the left, right? So the principle of proximity is described as like human lens perceives objects which are closer to one another as opposed to objects. So in this example, if you see on the left, we have three buttons and then we have this question mark button. I've just taken an example here. So buttons within Power BI, they obviously navigate and help you with functionality and move different areas around. So in this example, what happens is like they make up like a vertical menu, for example. And then these buttons are placed in close proximity except the question mark. So your mind and your brain automatically sees that as a separate space. Like it's a separate thing. It's not a part of the main menu. And this is again example of grouping things together, which is basically it could be used to relate page navigation function whilst basically keeping the help function, which is the question mark, separate from the other three. This is an example of proximity. Let's also talk about continuity. So this is, for example of continuity. So the continuity basically is where objects are aligned with one another. They are positioned in a sequence or a continuous flow. For example, this is a sequence. So in this panel, basically you have cards again, but they are like showed in a way like basically I've applied a single background to all these five cards. And it's a very subtle example of continuity because all four cards or five cards basically they're aligned to each other. They're like in a same flow. And they basically give the notion of space and consistency across the board from like left to right. And it's a very popular principle of Gestalt. It's very like also I think in a way if you see it's very effective, and you naturally flow when you read it, like you will go from left to right when you read it in a flowing path, giving user a sense of connection between all these objects. Then the next one is basically closure. Closure is like again a very important principle. So let's say this is a chart, these are same charts, for example. So closure, what it does is it basically will fill blanks to perceive a complete object, whether like it matches or not. So in this one, for example, we have taken these two objects. So what happens is like you are going to fill these incomplete shapes on your own. You don't need this border line to like make sure that this is a chart. In a way, if you look at this chart also, you will see that it's a unique shape. It is still overlaid on two different objects, and that it basically is going to be a rectangular surface area or rectangular background. So you don't really need this border. It's additional. It's just not needed at all. So these are like, for example, four of these principles which actually translate into how you can build really, really effective designs on your Power BI dashboard. I personally do like continuity a lot and also similarity because I think they really do like send out a key message when you are building, for example, a dashboard and like very, very effective in a way you design it. So let's go back to the slides now and let's talk about how do you build the right visuals. So, for example, you have like same set of data and you want to build two different visuals. So, for example, this pie chart on the screen, and this pie chart obviously comes from the Power BI, and the left one is not the right example of how you build a pie chart. For example, this is the right one. In the left one, you have used five different colors, four or five different colors, which are not really needed. You can use monochromatic shades of colors. The left one basically like also has these black lines as borders for each of the different parts of the chart, which are again overhead. You don't really need. It's an unwanted element basically of your pie chart. You can essentially make sure that you don't use these additional lines. Instead of just keep a gradient of color or maybe like keep them very, very monochromatic, so that like it looks also visually effective and intuitive and also like aligns really well with the way you have kept your dashboard design consistent and like similar across the board. Now, building the right visuals. So obviously this session isn't about building the right visuals, so I'm gonna not go detail into every single one of them. But I'm gonna cover some bits. For example, a lot of times I've seen like charts which are built which are not right. For example, categorical data and continuous data are not, like, they're shown on different charts and the chart selection was not right. So in case you don't know comparison, you can use a bar chart, line chart, or bubble chart. Or if you want to show trends over time, you can use stacked bar or stacked area or area chart. If you are trying to show correlation, you can use a column chart or scatter plot. And if you're, for example, showing part two, you can use a donut chart or a tree map chart. And then if you are trying to use ranking, which is like you can use order bar or decomposition tree or a funnel. It depends really on the kind of data you have, but do understand a difference between what categorical and continuous is and make the right effective use of charts for like building your dashboard. I also want to mention that in your in like implementing feedback. So this is a very important slide because like a lot of times I've seen like this happening that people get feedback and they don't implement feedback on their dashboard at all and they don't improvise it. So the main five things I'm going to cover on this one is like how do you treat feedback as a product input, gathering like inputs at key touch points, prioritizing the value, and then how do you implement it. So first of all, when you start to get feedback, let's say you've shown a feedback to your user and somebody and they're giving you like a lot of things to change, treat it as a product input. Think like your dashboard, for example, it's your product, you have created a product, treat that as an input of your product and try to gather that feedback on early. Don't wait till the end of the cycle. We have built a whole dashboard, you spend 3 4 weeks and then you go out and be like, I want to now implement that dash like all these changes. Gather it at early times when you speak with them. Then a lot of times people implement all the changes without thinking why those changes are needed in the first place. So also prioritize value versus effort. What is the value of that change? If that change will become significant impact, then yes, you can go and change it. But I think also take a step back and realize what value it will bring. Implement that change in like iterative releases, which means like step by step, and then track adoption. This is a really key part. A lot of times like dashboards are built but training and adoption is not given. Make sure you track adoption once your dashboards are live. One simple framework which I personally use when people provide feedback to me, for example, if I've built something, is like there's a feedback they've given me. I've taken an action based on like whatever feedback was provided. Maybe like they wanted to change a visual, maybe they wanted to add a slicer, and I see if there was any change in the outcome. And then outcome can vary. Like for example, it could be if I'm expecting better usage. It could be like if I'm expecting like more like clarification emails, or it could be more like if I'm expecting like there will be more time spent on viewing the dashboard. So implement feedback step by step. Understand that your dashboard, let's say, is a product that you have created, and implement feedback like you would implement that on a product. And always prioritize based on what is the value of that change. Is that change gonna bring a huge and massive impact? And also prioritize it accordingly. Do not implement all the changes just because somebody has asked you to make those changes. And then obviously at the end of the day, be careful and be very clear about what you are trying to achieve when you are building this. What's your why behind building that dashboard? One more thing I want to cover is like measuring success on the dashboard. This is a very common questions I've seen people asking. What is like the success of a dashboard? How do you know it's great? How do you know it's valuable? So the first thing is like use surveys of feedback. Ask your audience if they understand the key message, like what kind of comprehension they have. Do they get the questions answered they wanted? Did they get the data they needed? Did they get whatever questions or visuals they wanted? Ask them those questions. Then again, use Power BI's usage metrics to understand how much time has been spent, what has been the interaction rate. Click any kind of like there's a whole report which is there in the Power BI service, which gives you detail around like how much time was spent, what kind of work was done. So that also indicates that you have created something which is actually of value to the users. Then, was there any like follow-up actions or behavioral change after you've built a dashboard? For example, what kind of decisions were made? Was it data any useful to anybody? Then, what was the ROI? It's a very common statement which you will get, like what was the time and effort spent on dashboard justified by the outcomes that they're trying to attain? And then if it is shared like with different people across teams and departments. So for example, like you've built something and it was being like shared with across different teams, shown as a prototype of like what a great dashboard example it would be. So you can use like different levers to make sure that your dashboard is success. One of the most solid way of like obviously showing your dashboard is using the usage metrics on Power BI. So it gives you a lot of, I think it gives you 8, 9 metrics and not and more. I think you can show, for example, how many views you are getting on your dashboard every other day, then who are the people who are using it quite actively, then how many unique users you are getting per day, how many shares for you're getting per day. And you can access it on the Power BI service using the usage metric report. You will get a whole detailed report about everything. Um, this is really important because knowing how your content, how the dashboard that you have built actually creates an impact, and it also shows like if your efforts have been prioritized. Usage metrics shows like a huge segment of different like KPIs, and like it will also tell you if your dashboard is not being viewed at all. And I think that is the point you would want to understand why it is not being viewed, what kind of feedback is needed to make sure that it's actually valuable to your end users, your stakeholders, your customer. You can run the usage metrics, obviously, as I said, in the Power BI service. It's really effective. It gives you, I think, 10, 9 metrics. I think there's rankings also it gives. And it's quite useful to give all the, comprehensive details about what dashboard should contain, essentially. And towards the I'm going to conclude with like 5 main things towards the end of the session. So first is start with the user. Like as I showed in the start, who will you design this dashboard for? Is it for the executive, operations, or is it for like a team at your level? What decisions are being made, what questions will be answered through using that. Then design for action, which means like don't design it just for data, also design it for like what kind of decisions you are aiming to you want people to make using that. Are you trying to make sure that your product is being used more? Are you trying to improve sales? So make sure to understand the business domain really, really well. Then